G'day and welcome to Does It Matter? Here's an interesting chestnut. Men, not women, are the romantic gender. I would contend that from north to south and east to west. Women are the pragmatic gender, at least in relation to relationships and relational matters. Women had to be pragmatic. They had to have babies. The consequences of relational entanglements were much greater for them and always have been. Consequences greater. The decisions they would have to then make were greater. So they had to be pragmatic. Romance was the great romantic poets, Lord Byron, Shakespeare, Shelley, so on and so on. They're all men. All the guys writing the majority of sonnets and poetry and the romantic literature, sort of the 13th century onwards, were men. Romance is something that is to a large degree for men. Now, women appreciate it and enjoy it, yes. They benefit from it enormously. But from an evolutionary standpoint, women had to be much more pragmatic about their choices. And men could afford to be less pragmatic because they were looking for health and pleasantness. If you were pleasant to look at and a pleasant, congenial person, and you had good health, and they liked you, that would be enough. So it was men that actually facilitated romance. Men that developed its architecture, which comes down to us today. Ironically, we got the idea in the sort of mid to late 20th century into the 21st that romance is for women. That's complete rubbish. Romance, again, is enjoyed by both men and women, but it's predominantly an artifact of male psychology, not female psychology. Women love romance, but there's cogs ticking in the background that are looking at all kinds of things other than just facial symmetry and how clever you are with words, or whether you have a nice voice or anything like that. Any of the more romantic applications. No. This is where income for a lot of people, a lot of women matter. Social status. These matters have an impact on the prospect of their children. So women are hardwired to consider the future prospects of their children. Men do too, in different ways. But our evolutionary pathways as men and women are quite different, and we've evolved in a parallel track, but not the same at all. There are some profound differences between men and women along those evolutionary lines. And men could afford to be romantic to some degree throughout history, and so they were. And it was a feature of men that women, at least until very recently, women enjoyed. And I still think that a lot of women do enjoy that feature. But it's not really what makes them decide on who they want to be with. I'm sure it may sway it to some degree in the short term, but in the long run it has very little bearing on it. And I think as men we often forget that innate female pragmatism will come to the fore sooner or later. And I do wonder if perhaps, especially in these sort of benighted times where we're so distant from our evolutionary heritage, we're so distant from existential pressures, environmental pressures that tended to keep our feet on the ground, whether both men and women are, their heads are kind of lost in the clouds. And I think it makes us easier to become ideologically and even religiously suborned by ideas. It makes it easier for us to be possessed by concepts that are nonsense or only loosely grounded in reality. So it makes life harder for the people who believe them, believe such things. I think that today's world makes it easier for men's romantic nature to trip them up, and I think it amplifies females' evolutionary nature to seek a pragmatically selected partner, and in the process, I think it makes a mess of things, a hash of things. But I found it interesting that the last 40 or 50 years in particular, we've been sold a cultural perception that's just grossly incorrect. Evolutionary science, behaviorism, behavioral genetics, anthropology, archaeology show very clearly it's not the case. And just some common sense and an examination of the historical record would show that. So many assumptions derive from that, and I'll talk about them at length in other videos. But when we step away from our evolutionary underpinnings and we treat ourselves like, blank slate, tabula rasa, creatures of culture, all nurture, we're in la la land, and we put ourselves in enormous danger, all of us. And it's probably the source of most of our major social problems today, is that apart from tending to throw the baby out with the bathwater, throwing out good old ideas as well as the bad ones, we have a tendency to think that we can simply walk away from our anthropology. We can't do that. It's in your genes. It's in your cells. And it's still got enough environmental cues to be triggered. Always will. And so we're still trying to enact cave people anthropology in a modern world. And that probably explains quite a few of the messes that we find ourselves in these times. But yeah. Like, if you're a guy, you want to recognize that, do some research. We are the romantic sex. Women are the practical sex. They had to be. There was no choice. They had no choice. And again, they were the grateful recipients of romance. They were not the originators of it. And we as men were the architects of that, because we could be. And now that society's changed so much in the last 30 years, and will continue to do so due to technology's impact, our anthropology will continue to work against us as much as for us, more and more and more. Understanding what kind of creature we are, what kind of primate and hominid we are, understanding the evolutionary pathways that we just can't ignore. I mean, you can, but you won't be happy. It'll mess you up, and it'll mess everyone up around you eventually. Understanding the anthropology and being able to reconcile it with today and know what you should throw out and what you shouldn't throw out, which is always an issue, will probably help us negotiate this massive transitionary period that'll probably go on for a good century. So take that one. Cheers.